There's a report in LifeSiteNews.com that says that President Trump is the most pro-life president in American history, the most pro-life president in the history of the Republic, even though there are some lacks that the author sees in the administration, in the presiding of Donald Trump. That's what president means. A president is simply one who presides. To preside is the presider or the president. So he is presiding for now. He's sitting in that seat, and he's been promising pro-life appointments, and has done many things that are favoring of the right to life, and he's pulled us out of UNESCO. He's cut off Obama's failed $100 million a year fornication promoting sex ed program. He's withdrawn funding from the UN Population Fund, which of course favors the destruction of black people. And in light of that, I wanted just to mention that there's a scandalous essay today. It says scandal, of which I'm trying to make the best. And that's what I do, David Tulis. I try to make the best of even the darkest things. And it's this: in 2015, women in Hamilton County, 151 women, maybe a few fewer, destroyed boys and girls at a clinic using the help of a doctor in the year 2015. Now, this is you might say, well, that's just awful, and we regret that they felt that way about their heirs, right? Their offspring, their sons and daughters. But here, even in the statistic, which if I were just a regular journalist, I would call grisly, right? GRISLY. The grisly statistic of 181 children in Hamilton County being destroyed. Here's how you can see, even in the judgment of God against Chattanooga and against these families, right? It is the greatest judgment you can have against a particular family is the death of a child, and it's even greater when the family member, in this case the mom, destroys the child of her own free will with her. And she even has to pay for it. She pays for the death of that child. She accomplishes the death of that child. What greater judgment can there be? Now, the reason I say I want to see something to celebrate in this figure is that it could be many more, right? And so clearly, since this is a voluntary act, in fact, it's enshrined in the Constitution. We're supposed to believe under Roe v. Wade case 1973, and there could be many more. Because there are not as many, I calculate, Chattanooga has 3 times the blessings of God than the rest of the state. Okay. And if you look at the numbers, then Chattanooga has 6 times the blessings of God on the city and the people here than the city across the state with the triangular shadow of the pyramid there along the edge of the Mississippi River. That, of course, is the city named after Memphis, Egypt, the lost city, the city of the stone heart. That the idea adopted here. One's greatly impressed in founding that city here in Tennessee, naming it after a place where there was certainly a locking away of liberty, locking away of human prospect by the millions of tons in the raising of these monuments to the dead there in the old Hebrew, not Hebrew, but the old Egyptian monarchies of times of yore, and that's because abortion clinics are dotting the neighborhood of black people. And it is, of course, the black man who needs to be eradicated. That is what Margaret Sanger believed. And even in Knoxville, the clinic there, I don't believe is a Planned Parenthood clinic, but even there, they share in her ethos, they share in her eugenic ethic. And that is, of course, reduction of those who are undesirable. And black people, according to these very fine Americans, some of whom are black, are the elimination of the unwanted. And because there is more killing of babies elsewhere across the state, and less in Chattanooga, we have to count that as a blessing. So I'm not saying that these these killings are lawful or right or good. No, but I'm saying comparatively, relatively, our county has 5.37% of the state's population, but we account for only 1.65% of the babies destroyed. The number of babies destroyed across the state are just astronomical. It's simply astonishing. 151 here, but 9,113 tots destroyed under the government of Republican and Democrats in Nashville, and the death toll studiously reviewed over and over again, so long, and with such minute attention to detail in the Department of Health, that the numbers that when we finally get them are moldy as could be. These are 2-year-old numbers, and here we are at the end of 2017, and the latest data is 2 years old. So we know that this is all very deliberate and very careful, and killing a baby is part of the health of human health. Now, there's a story out of Texas where where a Yankee judge, Judge Lee Yackel, Wednesday, just before Thanksgiving, right? He has a thankful spirit, and he says that an operation that dismembers a baby girl or a baby boy cannot be blocked by the state statute. It would be an undue burden on women. Quote, the state's valid interest in promoting respect for the life of the unborn, although legitimate, he says, is not sufficient to justify such a substantial obstacle to the constitutionally protected right of a woman to terminate a pregnancy before fetal viability. And it's a reference to Senate Bill 8, which, when it was written and passed, criminalized the dismembering of a live child in utero, signed by Greg Abbott into law in June, and was to go into effect September the 1st. And so it's finally been, there was a temporary restraining order August the 30th, blocking implementation. The plaintiffs were Center for Reproductive Rights and Planned Parenthood, filing on behalf of several abortion abattoirs, which is slaughter. An abattoir is a slaughterhouse, by the way, a human abattoir in Texas. Texas Alliance for Life Executive Director Joe Podgman says the U.S. Supreme Court precedent does not allow states to protect non-viable unborn babies from abortion, even when the methods entails dismembering the baby during abortion. Most people find abortion by this method to be abhorrent. Well, here we have the question that I raised, and that is pro-life activism is a dead end. Okay, it's a dead end, and if you, my listener, especially if you have any connection to Christianity, should understand that, because it simply says, well, we accept in our efforts abortion per se. We just don't want dismemberment, or we just don't want abortion too late. You know, if killing a baby is a crime before God and a common law crime that's been now protected by opinion, that's all we have is opinion, then it should be abolished from the beginning. And everybody who has any sense of God's claim upon human life and upon society should be clamoring for abortion, not simply regulation. Now, after all, life is an unalienable right, right? You can't give up your life in traffic and in trade, but you can give up what are called inalienable rights. And I want to just bring you up to speed on this difference. It's come to my attention more strongly thanks to Mike, Confederate Mike, who is my partner here at the radio station. He sometimes calls my show, and you know, you can call my show too. The name is David Tulis, and I'd love to hear from you. The number is 800-8949. That's 800-8949. And you can interrupt me anytime. You know, I've got a lot of work to do on the show today, as you might suppose. But, you know, if you have a question for me or an observation, then I'd love to hear from you. But there is a difference between unalienable right, and that's what you have with a baby. A baby has an unalienable right and cannot give it up. Okay, now what happens with rights that you give up, though, is that you're trafficking in commerce with a right that you can surrender. You can't surrender a right to life, and a baby certainly, of course, has not surrendered his right or her right to life. That the life is being taken from him. He is being disseized of his life. He is being alienated from his own life. Now, the word unalienable and inalienable share the verb to alienate, right? To alien. Alien is an alien, of course, is a stranger. Here in Hamilton County, Tennessee, God's law still controls, and we have to be very careful about aliens and strangers here. And that's why when you see a Hispanic family, your heart, if you're an Anglo, if you're black, your heart should go after that family, and you should do everything you can to get to know that person, to protect that person, because God has a special favor for aliens and strangers. Well, his children of Israel, right? The Israelites were aliens and strangers, right? They were in Egypt. They became alienated from their high status, which they had initially, thanks to the work of Joseph in saving the country during the 7 years of famine, as you remember from the book of Genesis. And an alien is a stranger, and in the law, in common law and in God's law, the alien has special protection. So to alienate a right is to estrange a right, right? The alien's a stranger. He's trying to make his way here. He's trying to find his home here, his center, his family, his roots, his capital, his enterprise. He's trying to find that here in Hamilton County in Chattanooga. Maybe starting a little shop. Maybe the wife is, when she's done nursing the newborn, she's making tacos to take to a nearby housing project where their house is being built. Right, not for poor people, but a housing project being built where her husband and 3 or 4 cousins and a brother-in-law are working in laying the frame of a new house. And so she's there with tacos, and she makes a bit of a living doing that, right? So that's her. She's making her way here. She's trying to find her center here, and her husband is in another town on a job, and she sees him every other day or so. He comes to visit, bringing cash, as Rick Davis says, into the household. So these are aliens and strangers, and to alienate a right is to give it up. Now, Jefferson uses the word unalienable rights. William Blackstone, in his book Commentaries on the Laws of England, defines it. Those rights, then, which God and nature have established, and therefore called natural rights, such as life and liberty, need not the aid of human laws to be more effectually invested in every man than they are. Okay? In other words, you don't have to have a law to guarantee an unalienable right. You don't have to have a law to support it, to uphold it, to ensure it is there. It belongs to you because God gave it to you. And Blackstone goes on to say, neither do they receive any additional strength when declared by the municipal laws to be inviolable. So if you pass a law that says unalienable rights are inviolable, that they don't get any really support from that because they are already inviolable, okay, by definition. On the contrary, no human legislature has the power to abridge or destroy them unless the owner shall himself commit some act that amounts to a forfeiture. That's, of course, a crime for which you might be in Tennessee duly enslaved. Slavery is forbidden in Tennessee, except state slavery. State slavery is allowed, though private chattel slavery has been forbidden. So Bouvier's, the key law dictionary of 1856, says unalienable is incapable of being transferred. Okay, that's the key word, is transfer. Can you transfer a right or not? Things which are not in commerce as public roads are in their nature unalienable. Some things are unalienable in consequence of particular provisions of the law forbidding their sale or transfer, as pensions granted by the government. The natural rights of life and liberty are unalienable. So you see, the right to be born is an unalienable right, stolen with permission of Governor Haslam, right? With permission and acceptance of Governor Haslam and the Republican Party. The Republican supermajority in Nashville accepts the destruction of 9,113 baby boys and girls, and they're letting it happen. Are you angry at that? I just want you to ask yourself, why am I accepting this? Why do I support a party that allows that? Why do we not have an abolitionist candidate? We need to have a new abolitionist movement in Tennessee, and it needs to start with the right to life. Now, in 2010, there was a major change in the way the law began to operate. That was just after the progressive era had it really eradicated much of our ancient liberties, and the definition changed in the 1910 edition of Bouvier's. The meaning of inalienable began because unalienable and inalienable used to be the same, but the change dividing the two, separating the two, making a distinction, began just before World War I. Inalienable has evolved to mean rights that can be transferred with the consent of the person having them. So by consent, you can yield your rights. These are not unalienable These are not the unalienable, God-given, constitutionally guaranteed, inherent, and natural rights. Okay, that they're different. Inalienable, inalienable are the ones that can be transferred or yielded with the consent of the person having them. That's Bouvier's 1910 definition. If someone consents to transfer their rights, those rights can no longer be considered unalienable. Impossible to transfer inherent human rights. They become rights in commerce. And so by consent and by contract, your rights are lost. And I think we've done that in many, many areas. And think there's some are so obvious you almost can't. It might stagger you to think about them. But for example, if you take advantage of public education, you have surrendered an essential thing. You've surrendered the formation of the ideas of descendants in the future to the state and to the state's employees, who are all, of course, certified and approved. You've surrendered your outlook to the state's outlook, and then you have to ask yourself, well, what is the state's outlook, and why should I be concerned? The Declaration of Independence says our rights are unalienable. Thomas Jefferson, knew exactly what he was doing when he said that they are unalienable. He could not have used the word inalienable. He could have used the word inalienable since they were similar at the time, but he didn't. Unalienable is stronger. And the idea of alienating something is really kind of terrifying. And as I suggest to you, we've done that in many areas. We've alienated our children from ourselves. We've given them over to the state factory school, the factory machine, right? A social engine, a social machine to change the way they think, to change what their expectations are, to change their sense of what the norm is, to have them understand that the norm is the law, right? What we have is the norm. In other words, what you see every day in school with state control, state opinions, the student obeying the teacher, being passive until the teacher acts. This is a state of intellectual and moral passivity that is the purpose of public school, right? Public school is not about the subjects. The subjects are just the marketing part of the machine. And what really matters is that you become a subject. You become a subject. Sometimes I wonder in our newscast why the word we pick up the police lingo of the subject did this, the subject did that, or the suspect. Well, I rather that we not say it that way. I'd rather we say the man or the woman, rather identify the natural person rather than the person as object, right? The person as one being pursued or the person being sought after or demand from whom something is being demanded. There's I'm running out of time to read a quote from a very important case, Appleby versus City of New York, that came out in 1926. But it talks about vested rights of particular individuals. So, for example, the right to navigate the public waters of the state and to fish therein, and the right to use the public highways are all public rights belonging to the people at large. They are not the private, unalienable rights of each individual. Hence, the legislature, as the representatives of the public, may restrict and regulate the exercise of those rights in such manner as may be deemed most beneficial to the public at large, provided, and here's the key phrase that brings all that good government stuff to an end, provided they do not interfere with the vested rights which have been granted to individuals. In other words, that's a case that talks about the right of travel. One of the David Tulis pet peeves on the movement of people, an obscure corner of the libertarian world, but really it's crucial and essential. In fact, the free movement of people is essential to liberty. And that's why I'm David Tulis. You're a classical liberal. I'm the classical liberal at the right-wing station. And I hold to the free movement of people. I rather people be undocumented. I don't worry about undocumented immigrants, okay? I worry more about undocumented Americans. There are many undocumented Americans, and the problem is not them, but the problem is the documented ones. That would be people like you. You are fully documented. You have assumed in many ways the corporate status, and you are a dependent. You are a dependent, and you are a subject, and sometimes you are a suspect, right? You, my listener, are a suspect. And we talk often on my show, the David Tulis Show here at Nooga Radio, about the inevitability of your arrest. And I'm trying to steel you for that day I'm trying to get you ready for the day when you are arrested. And I want you to be fully informed as to what your rights are, because at that point, whether it's in a tax case, a traffic case, or what have you, I want you to be aware of the true calling of the free man. And that's this: to be the belligerent claimant in person. That's called a belligerent claimant in person, the man who stands on his own rights. If you're a man living in fear, you don't have them. Okay, if you live in fear of man, this is beyond you. Don't worry about it. Don't even think about doing this. If you live in fear of man, you can't be a belligerent claimant in person. But if you live in the fear of God, you have the best prospect of learning how to do this, asserting yourself, prospering yourself, looking out for the poor, looking out for the victim, right? Looking out for the person who's been alienated, who's maybe an alien here, who needs your help. David Tulis, wanting you to help the stranger. David Tulis.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4.